Hello and welcome to the channel. If this is your first time here, welcome. As you can see by the title, this is a dive to the USS Spiegel Grove in the Florida Keys. This is a very popular wreck dive site. I think something in the neighborhood of 50,000 divers per year back in the early 2000s were visiting this dive site. So it's a pretty well-known wreck site, probably the most well-known. I think at least in the U.S. This was sunk in 2002 intentionally to be a false reef substrate after it was taken out of service. It was actually originally sunken on its deck. It sunk upside down and then was righted about a month later by salvagers and flipped over to be upright in 2005 by Hurricane Dennis. So what we're going to go through here today is just a brief, this is I think a double dip on the Spiegel Grove. We dove this with Conch Republic Divers out of Tavernier. Very well known and well run operation. I believe they probably do this site multiple times per week, depending on who's diving with them. But what we're going to do is just a brief kind of overview, a little bit of the history. You'll see us diving around the boat. We'll try to point out some of the features to you. This is, like I said, a very commonly dove wreck. It can be both a recreational dive and it can be a technical dive. I think a lot of tech divers do try to dive this site because there is quite a bit of the superstructure left and quite a bit of the hull is still available to wreck divers. That being said, it is quite large and actually penetrating to the central portion of the vessel would be a significant undertaking. So I would certainly recommend not doing that unless you are trained as a technical diver with wreck penetration skills. And this is not that type of dive. This is going to be just a brief surface dive. We're only scratching a little bit of what this wreck has to offer. A little bit of information about the wreck itself. The vessel is 510 feet long. I believe it has a beam of 84 feet. Somebody will correct me on that. And I believe you can get to the top of one of the cranes somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 to 60 feet. And the hull rests in about 130, 140 feet of water. I think the bulk of this dive was done in between the 90 and 110 foot range. So if you've been paying attention to the video so far, you may have noticed that we came down. The anchor line was just aft of the foredeck and just aft of what was a gun turret. The Spiegel was armed, in fact, despite the fact that I don't think it was used frequently for combat. It was armed for defense. So the mooring line where we tagged in was just aft of the starboard gun turret, which is itself just aft of the foredeck. And as you can kind of see here, we are doing a very minimal penetration into the second or third deck. As you may have seen, we landed just above the main deck. All of these rooms, when it was sunk, were stripped of sort of their interior armaments, and these access hatches were cut to aid in the sinking, so that the hope was she would have been ballasted correctly so as to sink hull down, which, as I said a minute ago, didn't happen initially. But this was prepared for the sinking and to be an artificial reef by basically stripping out most of the functioning parts of the ship, leaving just the skeleton or the hull as minimal as possible, so as, number one, to encourage light wreck penetration, make it safe for divers, but also to encourage growth and marine life to come in and inhabit it. And as you can kind of see as we're moving around, there's quite a lot. The frame of the ship has been mostly taken over by sponge and coral growth, and you can see the access hatches as we look through them. These again were cut mainly to aid in the sinking. So it's almost like a vehicle, a car with no doors and no seats and no steering wheel, just a frame. And the Spiegel, the wreck, is home to, I believe, somewhere in the neighborhood of about 150 different species of fish. We did see a number of, parrot fish, reef sharks, yellow grunts, any number of typical reef you'll see in the Keys and Caribbean, as well as the typical coral and sponge growth as well. I know they do also see some cobia. If you noticed on the way down on the tagline, there was a school of barracuda. They like to hang out of the line, and actually it was kind of funny. The divers in front of us didn't want to go through the school of barracuda because they're probably a little bit more ill-tempered than most people want to deal with. So we actually had to go around them and hit the tagline before them. They didn't move. They didn't annoy us. They didn't do anything. They just kind of hang out there, I think, probably looking for prey. And as we're moving around, you can kind of see, I think we're on deck 2 or 3. I think the top deck was deck 4, but I think we have one level still above us. I could be wrong. But you can kind of see how wide open it is, at least up here outside. It's very easy to get into the access hatches and down into the innards of the ship. There's actually a sort of a commonly undertaken quest to go find the Snoopy painting on the floor, I believe, which is on deck number 2 or 3. Again, somebody will correct me if I'm wrong. But it's easily accessible, and one of the markers of a quote unquote recreational wreck dive is that you can dive the bulk of the decks of the ship on the Spiegel Grove without ever getting away from the light. So you'll always be within a visible light source, not necessarily within 130 linear feet of the surface. That being said, I think for the most part, these basic entry-level recreational wreck penetrations on the Spiegel are quite safe, so long as you're not doing anything particularly stupid. That being said, the rest of the hull, which was not made quite as safe and open for recreational divers, is definitely a more difficult, more technical penetration dive, which is not typically undertaken by recreational divers. So if you're looking now, you can see that school of barracuda on the line. I believe this is probably dip number 2 for that day. The barracuda just kind of hang there on the tagline, and you got to get around them to get down to the ship. That being said, again, they don't really bother you. So here we are landing. I think this is mooring number 5, maybe. I believe there's 7 mooring balls on the wreck. Again, somebody more familiar with the site can correct me, but you just got a glimpse of the starboard side. There it is again, the starboard side gun turret. This mooring ball was my guess is probably about 2/3 aft. 4. So probably 1/3 aft of the bow of the ship. And these gun turrets were really, really taken over by coral and sponges. It was really cool. This is kind of like a microcosm of the entire ecosystem. So here we are heading in. I think again this is probably deck number 2. This is just above the main deck, and we're going to head in and do just a little bit of looking around here. Again, these rooms are pretty much wide open. One of the things I think they took considerable care to do is strip out as many jagged edges and wires and lines as they possibly could, because as divers will know, that's what you want to not run into, is things that can tangle you up or things that can cut you. I believe you just got to look at probably the mail room, and I want to say this was an eating quarters of some kind. I'm not completely familiar with the ship itself, with the vessel itself, but I'd be really interested to know if any former crew members have done dives to the wreck. I have to imagine they have, and what they think about seeing it in this state. I think there was quite a bit to do as the ship was being prepared to be sunk, and some people I think were for it, some were against it, but nonetheless, there was significant military service undertaken in the ship, and people served many, many years on this vessel. I think it was a home to a lot of those crew members, so seeing it in this state would be really interesting. I'd be really curious to see what they have to say about that. I think some people are really, really happy that it's preserving part of history and it's contributing to the local ecosystem. I think probably others are less happy that it's kind of a skeleton of its former self, and in a way kind of a tourist attraction. So as you can see, there are floor hatches and there are staircases or ladders going between each deck that are fairly wide open, and if you look down through them or up through them, you can see the light kind of on the other side, which is part of what makes this a safe recreational penetration dive, or recreational wreck dive, I should say, for your day-to-day diver. Again, this is not a wreck diving instructional video. This is not a guide to the wreck. This is just a brief overview. So if you're looking to go dive this, I would recommend doing it with somebody who's done it before. Or if you're looking to do any more advanced wreck diving, certainly you need to be qualified to do that. So we've gone outside, I believe, the starboard side of the main deck, or deck 1, and we're kind of cruising up again to one of the upper decks. I have yet to figure out exactly what these are on the starboard side here, and I think that they were on both sides. But still, as you can see, the frame is just completely overtaken by coral and sponge growth. It was really, really cool to see how far the reef, the growth has come in just less than, actually about 21 years or so that it's been down there. I think Florida, as some people may know, has one of the biggest marine protected zones on the planet, if not the biggest. So they're really, really keen to do things like protect the marine and reef ecosystem, because it does draw a number of visitors per year and probably create some capital for the area. Here we are. I think we're starting to head back to the mooring line. I have to imagine we're getting relatively close to our NDL at this point. There's the mooring line itself. This is, like I said, the majority of this dive was done in the neighborhood of 100 to 110, maybe 90 to 110 feet. We did this on some variation of nitrox, basic nitrox with the aluminum 80, just single tank, which was plenty. The limiting factor on this dive was not the quantity of air; it was the NDL, because you're down deep enough that even on the correct concentration of nitrox, you got to watch your deco limits. If you are a recreational diver, if you're a technical diver, then by all means, you need to undertake your normal decompression practices. But we were just diving this sort of in a recreational fashion on a single back-mounted aluminum 80 with nitrox, so we were subject to the inert gas laws and subject to decompression limits. So it looks like we're doing another spin through one of the upper decks. Again, as you can kind of see, even without our light sources, it's very well lit and it's wide open. You can almost swim straight through the ship in a straight line and really not run into much. You can see your way out everywhere you go, which is part of the recreational, quote-unquote, wreck diving limits of your day-to-day diver. So it's, like I said, it's almost a good practice wreck, or introductory wreck dive for people who want to get a little bit beyond sort of the day-to-day recreational diving into some wreck diving. This is a good place to start. It's big, it's wide open, it's accessible, it's commonly dove, and it's really fun. There's a lot to see, a lot of cool life, a lot of cool history. You can get inside, you can hang out outside and see plenty either way. Looks like we ran into a little parrotfish munching on some of the coral a second ago. And this is, I think, headed back down closer to the main deck. Probably, again, looks like I was wrong a little earlier, headed back to the mooring line. We're probably, again, getting relatively close to our NDL and ready to head back up. So it looks like we're looking toward the foredeck now, toward the bow. Looks like there are some other divers down there probably getting ready to do the same. You will notice, and if you ever dive this, there's a little reef shark hanging out. Looks like a black tip, can't quite tell. That there will often be a number of divers here, whether or not they're with your contingent. There are a number of shops who do dives here on a routine basis, so you'll run into a lot of people on the wreck on any given day. Looks like another parrotfish munching on some coral on the line. So it looks like we're headed back up. I hope you learned something from this video. If nothing else, found it interesting. So if you're new to the channel, be sure to leave a like and subscribe, and we will catch you on the next one.